My name is Jessica Hale, and at my graduation, just seconds before my name was about to be called, my parents leaned in and said, "You'll never make it without us." Then they stood up and walked out right before the applause, right before the cameras turned my way. I stood there smiling for the crowd, pretending it didn't hurt, but the truth is, that moment burned itself into me. 10 years later, I walked into the boardroom of their company not as the forgotten daughter they left behind, but as the founder of the firm they'd just signed a $40 million contract with. Have you ever been abandoned in the very moment someone was supposed to be proud of you? And where are you watching this story from? What city, what time, so I'll know you're here with me tonight? I was born and raised in Fairview, a small Midwest town. Fairview wasn't the kind of town you found on travel maps. It sat between endless fields of corn and grain silos that gleamed silver under the sunday. The people there lived by routine: the whistle from the feed mill at 6 a.m., the church bell at noon, and the smell of diesel mixed with fertilizer at dusk. My parents fit that rhythm perfectly. They ran Hale AgWorks, a regional distributor for farm equipment and fertilizers. Everyone in town knew them, not for kindness, but for efficiency. My father, Robert, was the kind of man who measured worth in productivity reports, not feelings. My mother, Diane, carried the same principle into the home: sharp eyes, perfect posture, always rehearsing appearances for church luncheons or Chamber of Commerce dinners. And then there was Ava, my older sister, the golden child. Ava could do no wrong. She smiled at the right people, laughed at my father's tired jokes, and wore pearls to every school event. My parents saw in her the reflection of their success, a perfect heir to the Hale name. I was the extra seat at the table, the fifth chair no one planned for. Ours was a family of 4, but the table set was always for 3, with one folding chair added to the corner whenever I came down for dinner. That chair squeaked every time I moved, a reminder that I was never really part of the arrangement. My place was next to the pantry door, where the smell of motor oil from Dad's work clothes mixed with the faint sweetness of Mom's lemon polish. They'd sit under the chandelier, their plates always served first, talking about contracts, fuel prices, and who had just bought a new combine harvester. Ava's achievements filled every conversation. "Ava got another leadership certificate today," Mom would beam, slicing her roast beef neatly. "That girl's going places." Dad would nod, already calculating how her charm could someday help the business. Then his eyes would flick toward me, pausing just long enough to remember I was still there. "Jess, what are you doing wasting so much time reading those engineering books? You're not planning to fix tractors, are you?" The words carried more amusement than curiosity. When I tried to explain how a single redesign in a loading arm could improve fuel efficiency by 3%, he waved it off. "That's theory talk. Leave that to men who can lift something heavier than a pencil." At dinner, my voice always got lost somewhere between their sentences. I'd open my mouth, then close it when I saw Mom refill Ava's glass of sweet tea, but not mine. My sister would look at me with that effortless smile, the kind that said she wasn't cruel, just comfortable on her throne. "You know, Jess," she'd say, "not everything has to be so serious. Maybe if you smiled more, people would like you." 1. I learned early that in the Hale house, obedience was currency. The rule was simple. In this family, whoever follows directions gets invested in. Ava followed. I questioned. So when the time came for internships, scholarships, or even Dad's used car, the pattern stayed. Ava got the keys. I got the folded chair. Still, I watched everything. While they discussed shipping routes and quarterly budgets, I memorized their ledgers, traced the flow of inventory, the cost of storage, the timing of deliveries. I could see inefficiencies like cracks in a wall no one else noticed. At 16, I quietly adjusted the sequence of their supply orders, aligning them with fuel price drops. When the month ended, our savings ticked up by 8%. Dad thought it was coincidence. "Good quarter," he said at dinner, never looking at me. Ava giggled. "Maybe it's luck." That folding chair creaked under me as I leaned forward, wanting to speak, to tell them I'd done it. But before I could, Mom looked up, lips tight. "Jess, don't interrupt your sister." I sat back, the words dissolving like dust on my tongue. The house was large but cold, full of trophies, invoices, and the smell of ambition. My room was the smallest one, facing the alley where the delivery trucks parked. Some nights, when the engines idled, their rumble felt like company. I'd sit by the window, notebook open, sketching systems arrows, loops, flowcharts mapping out how shipments moved across counties. It wasn't rebellion. It was my way of understanding a world that refused to make room for me. Every Sunday, Mom would line us up for church. Dad in his crisp blue suit, Ava in pastels, and me, the shadow in a plain dress. People at church would say, "Your family's such a blessing, Diane." She'd smile and grip Ava's hand tighter, pretending she hadn't heard mine drag behind. It was always clear. Ava represented the company's future. I was just a spare part. When I once asked Dad if I could join the summer program at the local university, he didn't even look up from his newspaper. "College isn't a playground for hobbies," he said. "Learn the business first. Earn your keep, then we'll talk." At 16, I stopped asking for permission. I started saving tips from my diner job after school, coins hidden in a mason jar behind the vent. Every coin was a fragment of independence, a quiet rebellion against the hierarchy at that polished table. Still, there were nights when I wished for one kind word, one glance of recognition. Instead, I got silence. My mother's favorite saying echoed through the kitchen whenever I brought up grades or projects. "Don't overthink, Jess. Your book, smart, not life, smart. Stick to what's real." 1. What she didn't know was that real for me was numbers, systems, patterns, the logic of things that worked when people didn't. It started with the sound of engines. Every morning at 5, the Hale AgWorks trucks rolled out of the lot behind our house, one after another, the diesel coughing into the air like a heartbeat. Most kids woke up to alarm clocks. I woke up to delivery routes. From my window, I could tell which driver was running late by the rhythm of the gears shifting on the slope behind the barn. The trucks carried seed, fertilizer, and tools across 5 counties, hundreds of miles every week, and every route was drawn by my father's hand on a yellow legal pad. He never changed them, even when prices rose, even when fields flooded. "We've done it this way for 20 years, he'd say. "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." But I could see it tiny breaks, invisible to him, like hairline cracks under glass. Numbers made sense in a way people didn't. I kept a notebook hidden under my bed, filled with grids and arrows. Each line represented a road, each symbol a warehouse, a customer, a rest stop. I drew fuel costs next to mile markers, sketched out which truck was closest to which client, how many hours each driver spent idling waiting for pickup. To anyone else, it was messy doodling. To me, it was a language. A pattern, a conversation that finally talked back. One night, while Dad and Ava watched the news about another fuel price surge, I traced his route schedule with a ruler. I realized the same truck was traveling 70 extra miles every Tuesday just because of an outdated drop order. It was looping back to the same area twice. A small mistake, but one that, multiplied over months, burned hundreds of gallons of diesel. I redrew the order, rearranging 3 deliveries, cutting the mileage by nearly 100 per week. I printed it out and slid it under his office door before bed. The next week, I overheard him in the kitchen, bragging to Mom. "Strangest thing," he said, stirring his coffee. "Last week's deliveries ran smoother. Must have been the drivers finally learning efficiency." I didn't say anything. I just smiled into my cereal bowl. That small, quiet satisfaction knowing something I changed actually worked kept me going for weeks. But I couldn't help wanting him to know. So one night at dinner, when Ava was showing them her debate trophy, I said softly, "Dad, about the new routes. I adjusted the schedule last week, that's why." He looked up, fork in hand, half a smirk on his face. You adjusted my schedule? Yes. I ran the numbers. We were wasting almost 100 miles a week. Jessica, he interrupted, setting his fork down. I don't need a child teaching me how to run my business. Mom chuckled, more to fill the silence than to comfort me. Don't be offended, honey. Your father's done this for decades. He knows what works. I nodded, even though my throat had tightened so much I couldn't breathe. Across the table, Ava tilted her head with a look that said, "You should have known better." Later that night, I sat in the garage, staring at the trucks lined up like sleeping animals. The smell of oil and iron filled the air. I pressed my hand against one of the fenders and whispered, "You knew, didn't you?" The machine didn't answer, but the metal still held the warmth of the day. It was the only thing in that house that seemed to remember my touch. The next few months became my quiet experiment. I watched, listened, and took notes on everything: the timing of deliveries, the rate of equipment breakdowns, even the way weather patterns delayed certain shipments. I could predict when the north silo would overflow or when the fertilizer demand would spike before planting season. Dad called it luck. I called it reading the flow. At school, I gravitated toward physics and math, the only places that felt like home. I stayed after class to ask my teacher about optimization models. She lent me an old college textbook on systems engineering, its pages yellowed and full of equations I didn't yet understand. But I loved them. Each formula was a promise that chaos could be organized. I copied them down in my notebook at night, whispering the words like a prayer. When the annual county science fair came around, I submitted a project called Streamlining Distribution Routes for Local Agriculture. I built a small simulation with colored pushpins representing delivery points and strings showing routes optimized for fuel and time. My teacher said it was the most advanced submission they'd seen in years. But when Dad showed up to see it, he scanned the display, unimpressed. "So you're telling me you spent 3 weeks playing with yarn?" I opened my mouth to explain how the algorithm reduced total miles traveled by 15%, but he'd already walked off to look at Ava's friend's baking robot project. The judges gave me a second-place ribbon. I didn't care about the placement. What I cared about was the little piece of paper they handed me afterward, an invitation to apply for a summer program at the State University's engineering department. For the first time, I thought maybe I could build a future that didn't need my father's permission. That night, at dinner, I showed them the letter. They want me to attend a pre-engineering program this summer. It's competitive, but... Mom cut her steak with delicate precision. "How much does it cost?" "Almost nothing," I said quickly. "They cover most of it. It's a scholarship." Dad didn't look up from his plate. "That's in the city, right? 100 miles away?" "Yes." He took a sip of his drink. "You're better off spending the summer learning the family business. College doesn't teach reality." "But it's not college," I tried, my voice small but steady. "It's just a program." "Jessica." His tone was final. "Enough." The conversation ended there, like everyone before it. But that night, when everyone went to bed, I sat by my window again, watching the trucks roll out for another early run. Their headlights formed lines across the fields, glowing like veins carrying life through the town. And somewhere in that pattern, between the hum of engines and the rustle of corn, I made myself a promise. One day, I'll design a system that works better than all of this. One day, I'll prove that reading the flow is worth something. The next morning, I woke early and slipped the science fair ribbon into my notebook. It wasn't just paper, it was proof that I could see what they refused to see. And someday, those same routes that carried their trucks across the Midwest would carry my name further than they ever imagined. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, tucked between utility bills and fertilizer invoices. The envelope had the State University seal pressed in gold. I remember the tremor in my hands as I tore it open right there on the porch, with the hum of trucks warming up behind the house. "Congratulations. We're pleased to inform you that you've been accepted into the College of Engineering, majoring in industrial and systems engineering. The words blurred and reformed as I read them again and again, like proof that the impossible had finally bent in my favor. I ran inside, still holding the letter, leaving a trail of dust and diesel smell on the kitchen tiles. Dad was at the table going over payroll sheets, glasses perched low on his nose. Mom was slicing peaches into a bowl, every movement sharp and efficient. I got in, I said, out of breath. The University Industrial and Systems Engineering. They offered me a partial scholarship. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Dad looked up slowly, his pen tapping the edge of the table. And how much is the other part? They said there's financial aid I can apply for, I explained quickly. And I can work part-time. He cut me off. Work part-time where? You think you can study and live on air? That city will eat you alive before you even start. Mom placed the knife down carefully. Honey, it's not that we don't believe you can study, but we have a company here, a real opportunity. You could start as a bookkeeping apprentice this summer, learn how things actually work. I know how things work, I said before I could stop myself. That's why I want to study this. Industrial systems, it's literally what we do. Oh. Dad leaned back, crossed his arms. Don't get clever with me, Jessica. You think a few equations are going to teach you business. Everything you know came from watching this house run, from us. His words hit harder than I expected. I'm not saying I don't appreciate that, I said quietly. But I want to learn more. I want to do it properly. Mom sighed. Jess, be realistic. Not everyone's meant for that kind of thing. You're bright, yes, but bright doesn't mean prepared. You'd be alone out there. I already am. I whispered, but neither of them seemed to hear. The next morning, my car keys were missing from the hook. When I asked, Dad didn't look up from his coffee. You won't need it. I'm selling the Honda. Gas isn't free. I stood there frozen. That's my car. Grandpa gave it to me. He shrugged. He gave it to the family, and the family decides what's useful. Later, I checked my bank account. The joint savings I'd been adding to with diner tips emptied. Transferred for safekeeping, the note read. I confronted Mom that night. You took my savings? She didn't even look guilty. We're protecting you from yourself. College debt ruins people. We're doing this for your own good. I wanted to scream that control wasn't protection, but my throat locked. They didn't see me as ungrateful. They saw me as naive, someone who needed to be managed. For the next week, the acceptance letter sat on my desk, the gold seal dulled by fingerprints. Every time I looked at it, I heard my father's voice. Without us, you'll never make it. The words had become a kind of curse, both a warning and a challenge. One evening, Ava came home from her internship at the company, glowing in her new navy blazer. She dropped her bag on the counter and smirked. You're still thinking about that college thing? I didn't answer. She leaned against the fridge, arms crossed. Dad says you'll thank him later. Honestly, Jess, not everyone needs a degree to be useful. Look at me. I did look. She was perfect in their eyes, polished, obedient, molded into the next Hale face. You're right, I said softly. Not everyone does. That night, I packed a small bag, 2 shirts, jeans, my notebooks, and the folded letter. I didn't have a plan, just a pulse that said go. I slipped out before dawn, the house still dark. As I passed the garage, I ran my hand along the truck's fender one last time. The metal was cold, unfeeling, but steady, everything my parents weren't. By sunrise, I was on the highway with the $10 left in my wallet. I didn't know where I'd sleep or how long I'd last, but for the first time, the silence around me didn't feel like absence. It felt like space room to build something new. A few days later, Mom called. Where are you? She asked, her voice tight. I'm fine, I said. I'll figure it out. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped. You'll come home right now. This stunt doesn't impress anyone. I'm not trying to impress you, I said quietly. I'm trying to live. She exhaled, cold and sharp. You think you can make it without us? You'll learn the hard way, Jessica. Her words echoed in my ear long after she hung up. I stood at a bus stop, letter folded in my hand, the same way I'd held the program at graduation. The edges were already soft from use, but I couldn't let go. Somewhere inside me, something shifted. The same stubbornness that once made them call me difficult now hardened into resolve. If they wanted to see me fail, I'd make sure they had to look up to do it. I found work at a roadside diner 2 towns over, bussing tables, then working the grill. Every night after my shift, I sat in the corner booth, reading borrowed textbooks and watching truckers fill up at the station across the street. I started learning their routes, their schedules, their habits. Patterns again, always patterns. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I was living on 5 hours of sleep and diner coffee, but I was free. I no longer needed their money, their rules, their folded chairs. Weeks turned into months. I stopped expecting phone calls. The world outside Hale didn't know who Jessica Hale was, and maybe that was the point. I could build myself from the ground up without anyone naming me first. One evening, a truck driver noticed me scribbling in my notebook and asked what I was doing. "Just tracking deliveries," I said. He laughed. "You one of those planner types? Maybe you should run dispatch instead of wiping tables." The thought stuck. Maybe I should. That night, under the flickering diner lights, I looked at my acceptance letter one last time before tucking it inside my bag. I hadn't gone to the university, but somehow, I was already in class. Every late-night route, every fuel log, every overheard story from drivers was a lesson. The world had become my syllabus. My parents thought cutting me off would stop me. They didn't understand that what they took away wasn't what made me strong, it was what freed me. And though their voices still echoed in my head, I began to replace them with my own. They said I'd never make it without them. I decided that was exactly what I'd do. Graduation day smelled like cut grass and sunburnt metal bleachers. The stadium shimmered under June heat, and the air carried that restless mix of nerves and pride that only existed at endings. I remember standing in line behind Ava, her hair curled perfectly, my cap slightly crooked, my palms damp around the rolled program. The brass band played its rehearsed medley while the announcer called name after name, each one followed by cheers that rose like waves. Families whistled, clapped, shouted love from the stands. I searched for our row the Hale thinking maybe, just maybe, today would be different. They had been there at the start. I'd seen them when we marched in. Dad in his gray suit, arms crossed, Mom in her cream hat shielding her eyes from the glare. Ava seated between them, already checking her phone. When the ceremony began, I caught Dad's gaze once. He nodded, slow and distant, like acknowledging an employee who'd done a passable job. But it was enough to make me stand a little taller. Halfway through the ceremony, I turned again, expecting to find them. The row was empty. Their seats still indented from their weight sat beside a folded program with the Hale name printed neatly on it. For a moment, I thought they'd stepped away for water or shade, but they didn't return. I kept glancing back as the sun slid lower, my eyes straining over the crowd, searching for the familiar gray and cream. When the announcer reached the H's, my heart began to pound. "Hale," he called. There was a pause long enough for me to hope, and then he said the wrong first name. "Ava Hale," cheers exploded. I clapped too, because that's what we were supposed to do. She waved gracefully from her seat in the alumni section, the picture of everything right. Then, a few names later, he said it, Jessica Hale. I stepped forward, my gown brushing against my shoes, my chest tight. The silence behind me echoed louder than any applause. Somewhere a child was crying, somewhere a flag rustled, but in the space where my family should have been, there was nothing. Just 2 empty chairs and the abandoned program flapping in the wind. When I took the diploma from the principal's hand, I felt the weight of paper heavier than it should have been. My throat burned, but I smiled for the camera, the automatic kind of smile people wear when they're pretending not to bleed. After the ceremony, classmates huddled with their families for pictures. Moms cried, dads laughed, Flashes popped like fireflies. I stood off to the side, the diploma pressed against my chest. I held a cheap fountain pen I'd bought the week before, thinking I'd ask Dad to sign the inside of my program something sentimental, something to keep. It was smooth, dark blue, the kind of pen that made even messy writing look elegant. I turned it in my hand, imagining what his signature would look like next to my name. Then, as if the universe wanted to underline the moment, the pen slipped through my fingers and hit the floor. The sound was sharp, final. When I bent to pick it up, the nib was cracked, ink leaking down the barrel like a vein. I stared at it for a long moment before whispering, "Figures." The stadium slowly emptied. Teachers stacked chairs, parents carried bouquets and balloons. By the time I walked out the gate, the parking lot was almost bare. Our family SUV was gone. Only the faint smell of gasoline lingered in the warm air. I sat on the curb for a while, the broken pen in one hand and my diploma in the other. The edges of the paper cut faint lines into my fingers. The sky turned the color of old copper, and in that fading light, I understood something simple and devastating. They hadn't left because they were disappointed in me. They'd left because they'd already decided I didn't matter enough to stay. That night, I walked home alone. The streets were quiet, the sound of my shoes against the sidewalk steady, rhythmic, like punctuation. The house lights were off when I arrived. On the kitchen counter was a note in my mother's neat handwriting. "Dinner's in the fridge. We'll talk tomorrow." No congratulations, no mention of the ceremony, just instructions. I heated the leftovers in silence. The hum of the microwave filled the room like static. On the fridge, the family calendar still had Ava's internship dates circled in red. My name wasn't written anywhere. When I finished eating, I went to my room and opened the diploma again. The ink on my name shimmered faintly under the lamp. I slid the cracked pen beside it and watched a small pool of ink spread onto the paper. For a moment, I thought about cleaning it up, but then I stopped. The stain was honest. It was the truth made visible. That was the night I decided to leave. Not in anger, not even in rebellion, it was just acceptance. I realized I'd been waiting for permission my whole life to speak, to dream, to exist. And permission was never coming. Before I left my room, I tore a blank page from my notebook and wrote a single line. "I'm not leaving you. I'm just finally choosing me." I folded it and left it on the table beside the broken pen. When I stepped outside, the air was cool, heavy with the smell of rain. I looked back once through the window. The kitchen light flickered faintly, reflecting off the metal of that folding chair still tucked under the table. The same chair that had always reminded me I was extra, temporary. I didn't take much with me, just my notebook, my diploma, and a $10 bill I'd saved. The road stretched ahead, black and endless, lit only by the occasional flash of passing headlights. Somewhere behind me, the town kept sleeping, unaware that one of its invisible daughters had finally walked out of its shadow. I didn't just graduate from high school that day. I graduated from them. The bus rolled into the next town just after midnight, its headlights cutting through a fog so thick it looked alive. I stepped off with my backpack and my diploma, the air heavy with the smell of rain and diesel. The station was nothing more than a flickering neon sign above a vending machine. I had $10 left. No car, no plan, just an ache behind my ribs where home used to be. I followed the faint hum of a jukebox until I saw a 24-hour diner glowing like a match in the dark. The bell above the door jingled as I walked in. The place was nearly empty except for a trucker dozing in the corner and a woman wiping down the counter. She looked up, her dark hair tied in a bun streaked with silver, and gave me the kind of look people reserve for strays, half suspicion, half pity. "Kitchen's closing soon," she said. "I'm not here to eat," I murmured. "Do you need help? Anything washing dishes? Sweeping floors?" She studied me for a moment, then sighed. "You ever done kitchen work?" "No, ma'am. But I learned fast." Her eyes softened just a little. "Name's Alvarez. You can start by wiping those booths. Pays minimum." You quit, you don't get your check early. Understand? Yes, ma'am. That night, I cleaned tables until the smell of coffee and bleach blurred together. My fingers ached, but I didn't stop. When the last customer left, Miss Alvarez tossed me a towel and pointed toward the back. There's a cot behind the storage crates, she said. Don't make it a habit, but it's warm. That cot became my first home. I folded my graduation gown for a blanket and tucked my backpack under my head. The hum of the refrigerator became my lullaby, steady and cold, but constant, something my life had never been. Days blurred into nights. I worked the late shift, refilling mugs for truckers, wiping down counters, and memorizing their routes when they talked about deliveries. One of them, a tall man named Manny with weathered hands and kind eyes, noticed me scribbling in a small notebook between shifts. You keeping secrets or writing a novel? He teased. Neither, I said. Just notes about the routes you all talk about. The timings. The miles. The patterns. He chuckled. Patterns, huh? You sound like dispatch material. Oh, one. Dispatch? He grinned. Kid, that's the person who tells the drivers where to go, when to load, when to rest. They're the ones who make sure the wheels don't stop turning. It's half math, half magic. Something sparked inside me. Math and magic, that was exactly what I'd always loved. A few weeks later, Manny came in on his usual route, dripping from the rain, and dropped a paper napkin on the counter. On it, he'd drawn a chart of delivery times and stops. Here, he said. You want to learn? Figure out which one's the dumb route. I spent my whole break analyzing it, tracing loops with my finger, adding up distances. This one, I said finally, circling a route that wasted 40 miles between two stops. He whistled. You're good, kid. Maybe too good for this diner. Miss Alvarez overheard and rolled her eyes. Don't put ideas in her head, Manny. I need my tables clean. But later, when I was scrubbing pans in the back, she said quietly, He's right, you know. You've got the look of someone meant for more than dishes. Her words stayed with me longer than she probably intended. A few months in, Manny told me about an old friend who ran a supply warehouse at the edge of town. Guy's always short on help, he said. Name's Lawson. Pays by the hour. Tell him I sent you. So I did. The warehouse smelled of rust, hay, and oil. Rows of tractors, tool parts, and seed bags towered above me like sleeping giants. Mr. Lawson was a thick-set man with kind wrinkles and a cigarette permanently hanging from his mouth. You can lift 50 pounds? He asked. Easily, I lied. He laughed and handed me gloves. Then you're hired. That was job number 2 days in the warehouse, nights in the diner. I lived on coffee, adrenaline, and a quiet desperation to prove I could last. The first week nearly broke me. My arms burned from hauling boxes, my feet blistered, my hands calloused over. But every time I heard the beep of the forklift backing up, the metallic ding of the loading dock elevator, something about that sound felt familiar, mechanical yet alive, like the hum of progress. I began timing shipments, learning which suppliers were always late, how certain weather patterns slowed down the deliveries. The same patterns I'd once seen in my father's routes were here, too, hiding in plain sight. Manny stopped by sometimes between hauls, dropping off lunch or explaining how to read the dispatcher's board. See those colors? He said one day, pointing at the schedule pinned to the wall. Green means loaded, yellow means waiting, red means stuck. A good dispatcher sees the red before it happens. I wrote that down in my notebook. See the red before it happens. It sounded like something sacred. Between shifts, I discovered the public library, a quiet, air-conditioned miracle where no one cared who I was. I borrowed every book I could find on logistics, operations, research, and computer basics. The librarian, a gentle woman with wide glasses, would smile each time I carried out another armful. You're studying for something big, she said once. Maybe, I answered. I'm trying to learn how systems move. I'm anyway. At night, after my diner shift, I'd use the library Wi-Fi from the parking lot, my old laptop balanced on the steering wheel of a borrowed delivery van. I found free online courses. Introduction to Supply Chain Management, Excel for Beginners, Python for Logistics Automation. The words looked impossible at first, but I treated each lesson like a recipe: follow the steps, make mistakes, clean the mess, start again. Miss Alvarez noticed my exhaustion one morning when I nearly dropped a tray of mugs. "You can't keep burning both ends, kid," she said, refilling the coffee pot. "I have to," I replied softly. "I'm building something." She didn't press further. Instead, she packed me a sandwich and said, "At least eat while you're changing the world." That became our rhythm, me learning in silence, her watching quietly, both of us pretending not to care too much. By winter, the warehouse trusted me enough to manage shipments alone. Mr. Lawson started calling me the map girl. When trucks fell behind, I'd rearrange their stops, call ahead to clients, and somehow keep everything flowing. "You've got an engineer's brain," he said one evening, handing me a thermos of coffee. "Why the hell aren't you in college?" I smiled faintly. "Because some people decided I didn't need to be." He didn't ask who, he just nodded. Their loss. 1. That night, as I watched the last truck disappear into the horizon, its taillights blinking like red stars, I thought about that phrase, their loss. Maybe it was. The months passed, and I started to feel something new: belonging. Not the fragile kind that depended on approval, but the quiet kind that grows from shared exhaustion and respect. Miss Alvarez, with her sarcasm and warm eyes. Manny, with his coffee-stained jokes. Lawson, with his gruff faith. None of them asked for explanations. They just let me exist. The ding of the freight elevator became my morning alarm. The hiss of the coffee pot was my anthem. And the steady rhythm of truck doors slamming shut, that was music. It was the sound of life moving forward, one delivery, 1 mile, 1 breath at a time. I still had the cracked pen and the diploma in my backpack. Every once in a while, I'd unfold them, run my fingers over the ink, and remind myself why I was here. Survival wasn't a phase. It was an education. And though I didn't know it yet, the same girl sleeping behind the diner crates was quietly building the foundation of something far bigger. Because every spreadsheet I studied, every route I memorized, every late-night ding in that warehouse was teaching me how the world moved. And one day, I'd be the one designing how it moved. It started with a spreadsheet. Nothing fancy, just a few columns, some conditional formatting, and a dream. After months juggling shifts at the diner and warehouse, I'd memorized more delivery routes than most dispatchers ever did. I knew which roads flooded after heavy rain, which farm gates were locked after dusk, and which drivers liked to take the scenic route that always cost us extra fuel. Every wasted mile scratched at me like an unsolved equation. So one night, after closing the diner, I sat on the back booth with my secondhand laptop, a half-empty coffee, and a stubborn idea. What if I could make something that saw the patterns I saw, something that could plan routes better, faster, without guesswork? I opened Excel and began typing. Customer names, addresses, distances between stops. Then came time windows, fuel costs, and delivery weights. The cells filled up like a city of numbers, and before I knew it, I was building formulas, calculating shortest paths, looping in constraints, rearranging sequences to minimize total miles. It was crude, but it worked. For the first time, the map wasn't just in my head, it was on the screen. I showed it to Mr. Lawson the next morning. He was hunched over a shipment manifest, cigarette dangling from his lips, the usual storm of paperwork spread across the desk. "What's this?" he asked when I slid the laptop toward him. "Something I've been testing," I said. "It predicts which delivery order saves the most time and fuel." He raised an eyebrow. "And how do you know it's not junk?" I clicked the run button. The sheet flickered, then highlighted an optimized route. "Because yesterday, truck 4 drove 73 miles. If we follow the sequence today, It'll only be 59. He stared at me for a long second, then grinned. You're serious? Dead serious. He smirked, leaning back. Fine. If it works, you're buying the next round of coffee. It worked. By the end of the week, he was spending 18% less on fuel. Turnaround times improved, drivers were back earlier, and for the first time since I'd started, the warehouse didn't sound like chaos by noon. Lawson slapped the hood of a truck one morning and said, Jess, whatever that spreadsheet of yours is, it's black magic. You should patent it. I laughed. It's just math. He shook his head. Math that makes me money is magic. Word spread faster than I expected. A farmer who delivered grain to us asked if he could try that fancy calculator too. Then another and another. Within a month, 3 farms, 1 fertilizer distributor, and even a small tractor painting shop were paying me small monthly fees $10, $20, $50 to help plan their deliveries. I called it route consulting, but really it was just me, a laptop, and a growing obsession. I spent nights watching YouTube tutorials on Python, learning how to make Excel talk to code. Once I figured out how to automate distance calculations using open-source map APIs, the tool became more than a spreadsheet. It started feeling like the skeleton of something bigger. Still, I knew I was hitting a wall. I needed guidance, something beyond online tutorials. That's when I met Miss Patel. She was an adjunct professor who hosted free mentoring sessions for women in tech through an edX forum I'd stumbled upon. Her first message was short but kind. Your idea has potential, but Excel is training wheels. You need to think in systems. We started meeting virtually every Sunday night, her in Seattle, me in the back booth of Alvarez's diner with my laptop balanced between ketchup bottles. She made me rebuild everything from scratch this time using Python scripts, linear programming, and real optimization logic. It was brutal. For every solution I thought was perfect, she'd say, good. Now break it, find where it fails. Weeks turned into months. Between my 2 jobs, I barely slept. I coded on breaks, tested formulas during deliveries, and fixed bugs on napkins while wiping tables. But the tool kept improving. It could now handle multiple trucks, balance weight loads, and even predict bottlenecks. I named it Grid Path. Because for the first time, I wasn't lost, I was mapping my own grid, 1 line of code at a time. When I told Miss Patel about the name, she smiled through the webcam. That's a good one, she said. You're building not just routes, Jessica. You're building pathways for yourself, and for everyone who thinks they don't belong in this field. Her words hit me harder than she probably knew. By late spring, GridPath was running clean. It didn't just predict efficiency, it proved it. I used data from Lawson's warehouse and Manny's delivery logs as test cases, generating reports that showed real, measurable savings. 18% less turnaround time, 15% fuel reduction, 30% fewer idle hours. One afternoon, I printed the results, highlighted the numbers, and pinned them to the wall behind my bed. For the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to tell me I was capable. The proof was in black and white. When I presented the new version to Lawson, he stared at the charts, whistled low, and said, "You're gonna outgrow this place, kid." Devin. "I'm just getting started," I said, grinning. He wasn't wrong. Soon, the small businesses around town started talking. The grain co-op wanted a demo. A hardware store asked if I could help with supply routes. I didn't even have an official company yet, just a Gmail address and a PayPal link, but somehow I'd become the go-to logistics girl of rural Indiana. I remember one Saturday morning, sitting in the diner during the quiet hour between breakfast rushes. "Miss?" Alvarez poured me a cup of coffee and said, "So, you're a CEO now, huh?" I laughed. "More like a girl with a laptop and too much caffeine." She smirked. "That's how most CEOs start." That night, Manny stopped by for pie after his route. He leaned across the counter and said, "You know, Jess, every driver in the county's talking about your thing. Grid something?" "Grid Path," I said, pretending not to blush. Right. Whatever it's called, it's saving my guys real money. You ever think about taking it beyond these farms? I shook my head. It's not ready. He grinned. Neither are half the things that change the world. That line stayed with me. By the end of the year, I had 5 paying clients and a sense of direction stronger than any map I'd ever drawn. Miss Patel helped me enroll in a certification program in logistics through a university partnership, remote, part-time, fully funded. I studied at night, coded at dawn, worked all day. My life had become a relay of workstations: the diner counter, the warehouse desk, the library table. Still, every time the freight elevator dinged, every time a truck door slammed, I felt that same thrill, the sound of motion, of something becoming real. I started sketching the idea for a web platform version of GridPath, a real dashboard with accounts, route visualization, and live updates. I didn't have the money to build it yet, but I had the blueprint. I taped it above my bed, next to the ink-stained diploma and the broken pen I still carried like a relic. Sometimes, I'd stare at that wall and whisper to myself, this is where it starts. Because deep down, I knew GridPath wasn't just a program, it was my rebellion coded in logic. Every formula was a sentence rewritten from my father's voice. Every efficiency gain was a mile further from that empty seat at graduation. And the best part? No one could take it away. By the second year, GridPath had grown beyond the back booth of Alvarez's diner. What began as a fragile Excel sheet held together by coffee and willpower was now a living platform with dashboards, logins, and actual clients. I still worked nights at the warehouse, but my breaks were spent answering emails from farm co-ops across the Midwest who'd somehow heard about the routing girl with the magic software. I goad. The turning point came in the spring, during planting season, the industry's annual chaos. Every truck in 3 states seemed to be on the road, every silo overflowing, every fuel tank crying empty. Lawson called one night, his voice crackling through the line. Jess, these guys from the regional ag cooperative need help. 7 states, hundreds of farms, they're drowning in logistics. I froze. 7 states? That's not a test run, that's an entire ecosystem. He laughed. Then it's your kind of problem. The next morning, I drove 6 hours to meet the co-op board in a bland conference room lined with coffee stains and faded maps. Their chairperson, a sunburned man named Clyde, looked skeptical as I set up my laptop. We've heard you've got some sort of scheduling system, he said. We've tried those before, they never fit how we work. I smiled. That's because most systems start with software. I start with people. It wasn't charm, it was truth. I'd spent years listening to truckers, warehouse hands, and dispatchers. I understood how they thought, where the real friction lived. So, instead of a slideshow, I opened GridPath and pulled live data from their own delivery logs. Within minutes, I showed them how to reroute 54 trucks and save 600 miles in a single day. The room went silent. Then Clyde leaned back and muttered, well, I'll be damned. Whoa. 2 weeks later, we signed the contract, $120,000 per year, renewable, with expansion options. My hands shook as I held the pen. For once, the ink didn't spill. That deal changed everything. Suddenly, GridPath wasn't just a clever side project, it was a company. I registered it officially, rented a tiny co-working office near the highway ring, and hired my first team. 2 developers I met through Miss Patel's online network, a part-time customer service rep from the diner, and Manny, my first and most loyal believer, as dispatch lead. He walked into the office on our first day wearing a faded trucker cap and a grin that could light up the place. Boss, he said, looking around the bare room. You're missing a coffee machine. I'm missing everything, I laughed. But we'll start there. Those early months were electric. The 5 of us worked 14-hour days, surviving on instant noodles and purpose. The office smelled of burnt coffee and cheap whiteboard markers. We mapped out supply routes like battle plans, each line drawn across the Midwest, meaning another client served, another week survived. During the spring rush, the planting storm, we managed the co-op's entire distribution. Before GridPath, their drivers had waited up to 6 hours at silos just to unload. By the end of that season, we'd cut waiting time by a third. Trucks were turning faster, fuel costs plummeted, and for the first time in decades, farmers weren't losing sleep over late deliveries. One evening, Clyde called me, his voice breaking with laughter. "Kid, you saved us a small fortune." My guys say it's like watching chaos turn into choreography. A week later, a local business paper ran an article titled, "From Empty Seat to Full Map, Local Engineer Revolutionizes Farm Logistics." I remember reading that headline at my desk, staring at the words empty seat. It hit me harder than I expected. They didn't know what it meant to me that the empty seat wasn't just a metaphor, it was a memory. That night, when everyone had gone home, I drove back to my apartment and dug out the old graduation program, the one with the folded edge next to my unread name. The paper was yellowed now, fragile like old skin. I smoothed it gently, framed it, and hung it on the wall above my desk. It wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. That empty seat had become a full map. The silence they'd left me in had become the architecture of something unstoppable. Manny walked in the next morning and pointed to the frame. "That your graduation thing?" "Yeah," I said softly. "They left before they called my name." He frowned. "Their loss." "Yeah," I said, smiling faintly. It was. The more clients we took on, the faster the company grew. Small-town warehouses became statewide networks. Co-ops became corporate suppliers. What once took me nights of manual planning was now handled by GridPath's algorithm in seconds. Still, I refused to forget where we came from. Every new hire had to spend their first week shadowing a truck driver, eating at diners, talking to real workers, the people who made the system breathe. "You can't fix a supply chain you've never touched," I told them. Miss Alvarez came by one afternoon to see the office. She looked around at the whiteboards covered in route diagrams and said, "You always liked cleaning messes, huh?" I laughed. "Still do." She smiled and placed a small cross pendant on my desk. "For good luck," she said. "Though I doubt you need it anymore." But part of me did need it. Because as the success stories piled up, so did the pressure. I was now running a business that reached across 7 states. Every mistake cost real money. Every decision echoed back through hundreds of drivers and farmers who depended on me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit in that office alone, the faint hum of servers filling the silence, and stare at the framed graduation program. The crease through my name looked like a scar, ugly, permanent, but proof that I'd survived. One Friday evening, after we wrapped another rollout, Manny clinked his coffee mug against mine. "You realize what you did, right?" he said. "You built something no one believed you could. From scratch, out of thin air." I looked at the map glowing on the screen, lines connecting states like arteries feeding a living system. "No," I said. "I built it out of silence." He didn't get it fully, but he smiled anyway. The truth was, GridPath wasn't just software. It was every unanswered question, every ignored idea, every time someone said, "Stay in your lane." I'd taken all of it and turned it into an empire of motion. I still didn't have a car of my own, but I had a fleet moving under my command. And deep down, though I didn't yet know how soon, the road I'd built was already leading back to the people who'd once told me I'd never make it. The first time I saw my name in a national trade journal, it didn't even feel real. The headline read, "GridPath optimizes the Midwest's agricultural supply chain." The article called me Jessica Gray, founder and CEO, and detailed how our routing algorithms had slashed costs and emissions across 7 states. Seeing Gray, instead of Hale, was more than a name change, it was a rebirth. My old name carried ceilings, expectations, and the echo of slammed doors. Gray carried nothing but freedom. The story spread fast. Bigger clients started calling. The platform's data network expanded from local co-ops to regional distributors, and for the first time, we were turning down contracts instead of chasing them. Investors reached out, too, some offering partnerships, others trying to buy us out entirely. I said no to all of them. I wasn't building GridPath to sell it, I was building it to last. Then one afternoon, an email came through from an unfamiliar domain, hailegg.com. For a moment, I thought it was spam. But the subject line stopped me cold. Request for logistics consultation, urgent. My heart kicked once, hard. Hail AgWorks. My parents' company. The one I'd left behind a decade ago. I clicked it open, my pulse thrumming in my ears. The message was professional, almost sterile. Dear Miss Gray, we are seeking immediate consultation regarding route optimization and inventory management. Our current logistics network has encountered critical inefficiencies, resulting in significant product loss and client attrition. We were referred to your firm through the Midwest Co-op Association. If possible, we would appreciate a discreet preliminary demo at your earliest convenience. They had no idea. Hail AgWorks, once the family empire that had dismissed my ideas, mocked my ambitions, and told me I'd never make it without them, was now unknowingly reaching out to me for help. I stared at the screen for a long time. My reflection hovered faintly in the glass, older now, sharper around the edges. A decade of distance, pain, and rebuilding, all leading back to this moment. When I finally looked up, Manny was standing at the door with 2 coffees. You look like you just saw a ghost, he said. I turned the screen toward him. Close, I murmured. It's my past. He leaned over to read. Hail AgWorks? Wait, isn't that? Yeah. He whistled low. So what now? You gonna ghost them or give them a taste of their own medicine? I took the coffee and stared out the window, where trucks rolled like clockwork along the highway. Neither, I said quietly. I'm going to give them a chance to survive. Seriously? After everything they did? This isn't about them. It's about what I've built. GridPath doesn't exist to get even. It exists to fix broken systems, even the ones that broke me. Manny didn't say anything for a while. Then he nodded slowly. Then let's make it count. We set up a meeting anonymous, through a consulting intermediary. They thought they were negotiating with Gray Consulting Network, a neutral logistics firm that represented GridPath's regional expansion arm. I watched the correspondence unfold with an eerie detachment, like reading a story written about someone else's life. From the attached reports, it was clear Hail AgWorks was in deep trouble. Years of outdated infrastructure, bloated routes, and high-interest loans had left them suffocating. They'd recently lost their largest retail partner, and with harvest season approaching, they were bleeding cash by the hour. The irony was brutal. The very inefficiencies I'd once begged my father to let me fix had finally come back to destroy them. When the intermediary called for a formal proposal, I prepared one myself. Every line of it precise, deliberate, and clean. Proposal: Hail AgWorks X GridPath Logistics Solution 3-year partnership. Scope: full-scale optimization of transport, warehousing, and supplier coordination across 12-state network. Value: Patrzeć, 0 total, software license, network integration, infrastructure upgrade. Terms: ROI and KPI targets tied to cost reduction and delivery performance. Optional clause: GridPath holds a 35% equity acquisition right if KPIs are achieved within contract period. When I finished drafting it, I sat back in my chair and exhaled. It wasn't revenge, it was evolution. This deal wasn't just going to save their company, it was going to bring my life full circle. Before sending it, I called Miss Patel. I need your eyes on something, I said. She looked over the proposal and gave a small smile. Very strategic, she said. They'll think they're saving themselves, but really, you're giving them a choice: adapt or disappear. That's the idea. And you'll go in person? She asked. Yes, I said. But not as Jessica Hale. As Jessica Gray. She nodded. Then you're ready. The week before the meeting, the local business paper ran another feature about us, our expansion into new markets, our sustainability initiatives, the ripple effect of GridPath's tech. I didn't plan it, but the timing was poetic. The same article that had started our rise would now be the breadcrumb leading them straight to me. A few days later, our COO walked into my office with a grin. They accepted the offer, she said. They want a live demo next Monday in their headquarters. I froze for a second, staring at the framed program on the wall. The bent edge by my name caught the afternoon light. Hale Agworks. The place where my voice was dismissed. The house that told me I'd never make it without them. Now, they were paying $40 million for my solution under my new name. Confirm the meeting, I said. And make sure they spell Gray right. Manny raised his mug from across the room. You sure about this, boss? Walking back into the lion's den? I smiled. I'm not walking in, I said. I'm taking the elevator. He grinned. Then let's hope it dings loud enough for the whole world to hear. That night, I stayed late, running my hands along the edges of the framed graduation program. 10 years ago, my parents walked out before my name was called. Next week, I'd walk in before theirs ever would be again. This time, I wasn't coming back to be seen. I was coming back to be recognized. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding. For a second, I just stood there, staring at my own reflection in the polished steel. 10 years ago, that same sound had meant freight lifts and warehouse shifts, the echo of labor and survival. Today, it carried me to the top floor of Hale Agworks, the company that once refused to call my name. The air changed as soon as I stepped out. The hallway smelled faintly of pine polish and stale authority. Frosted glass walls bore the Hale crest in silver. Rooted in family, built to last. I almost laughed at the irony. My heels clicked against the marble as I walked toward the boardroom. Beside me, my COO, Lena, carried the presentation case, and our legal counsel followed with the contract folder. I didn't need to check my reflection to know what they'd see: tailored slate suit, hair pulled back, posture steady. Not the daughter they once ignored. Not the girl who swept floors and coded in diners. At the end of the corridor, a receptionist opened the heavy oak door. Miss Gray, she said softly. They're ready for you. The room was exactly as I remembered: long table, 12 leather chairs, and the head seat slightly elevated like a throne. My father used to sit there, giving orders as if they were commandments. Now, sunlight poured through the glass behind him, throwing his outline into sharp contrast. My mother sat to his right, perfectly composed, though her eyes darted nervously when she saw the team enter. And Ava, immaculate as ever, sat with her tablet open, pretending to review figures she didn't understand. They didn't recognize me. Not at first. I placed my folder on the table, letting the GridPath logo face them. 3 intersecting lines forming a network. My nameplate read Jessica Gray, founder and CEO. Good morning, I began. My voice was calm, measured, the same tone I'd learned to use in boardrooms that actually listened. Thank you for meeting with us. I understand your company's facing significant operational challenges. Our system is here to provide sustainable solutions. My father cleared his throat. Miss Gray, we appreciate your time, he said, formal and clipped. We've reviewed your proposal. It's ambitious. It's effective, I corrected gently. He shifted, perhaps not used to being interrupted. Well, we'll be the judge of that. Lena began the presentation. Graphs bloomed across the screen: shipment costs, inefficiency indexes, potential savings. Each data point was a quiet reminder of everything I'd once seen and been told to ignore. Halfway through, my mother leaned forward. Forgive me, she said, squinting at the slide. Have we met before, Miss Gray? You look familiar. I smiled politely. Perhaps in passing, I said. I've worked in your region for several years. Her eyes narrowed, uncertain. The final slide appeared, Projected savings of 38%, delivery times cut by 42%, net gain in contract recovery exceeding $10 million annually. The room fell silent. Lena closed the laptop. This is the comprehensive rollout under our 3-year, $40 million partnership plan. The contract includes system licensing, infrastructure optimization, and access to our data network. My father nodded slowly, still studying the figures. 40 million, he repeated. That's a substantial commitment. Substantial results require substantial commitment, I replied. Then Ava, my perfect sister, spoke for the first time. And what about oversight? We'd like transparency. You understand, after recent losses, we're cautious about outsiders. I met her gaze. I do understand. Then, almost delicately, I turned the page of the proposal to reveal the final clause. Which is why I've included an option. If GridPath meets the agreed KPIs including cost reduction, delivery compliance, and partner restoration, we will be entitled to a 35% equity acquisition in Hale AgWorks. My father's pen froze mid-spin. Equity? Yes, I said simply. It aligns our incentives. If you thrive, we thrive. If not, you lose nothing but inefficiency. He looked up sharply. We don't hand over our company to consultants. You wouldn't be handing it over, I said. You'd be saving it. Something in my tone must have hit him wrong, because he leaned forward, studying me more closely. Tell me, Miss Gray, he said, voice colder now. Why do I get the feeling you've been waiting for this moment? For the first time, I allowed the corner of my mouth to curve. Maybe because I have. His brow furrowed. Ava tilted her head, eyes widening slightly. Wait, she began. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a pen, sleek, silver, engraved with GridPath technologies. I placed it gently on the table. You once told me I'd never make it without you, I said quietly. But I did. And now, you're the ones who need my signature. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's jaw went rigid. Ava whispered. Jessica Gray, I corrected softly. Founder and CEO. For a long time, no one spoke. The silence stretched, brittle and sharp. Finally, my father sat back, masking disbelief with control. We're here for a solution, he said stiffly, retreating to professionalism. Not history. I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. Then it's convenient I brought both the solution for your company and the history you tried to erase. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the projector. I opened the contract to the signature page. $40 million, I said. Licensing, rollout, and network integration. You'll have full operational support within 6 months. If we meet the KPIs, the equity clause activates automatically. He stared down at the document, but his hands didn't move. I could see the conflict in his eyes, pride and desperation warring under the weight of failing numbers. Finally, he muttered, "Let's proceed." I nodded, uncapped my pen, the upgraded version of the one that had cracked on graduation day, and placed it neatly beside the dotted line. The soft click echoed through the room. As I signed, the world seemed to still. The scratch of ink on paper filled the air like thunder disguised as whisper. When I was done, I looked up at him and said quietly, 10 years ago, my name wasn't called. Today, I call it myself on your contract. No one breathed. The hum of the city outside filled the silence, the faint ding of an elevator sounding in the distance, the same sound that had once meant failure, now marking ascension. I slid the signed document toward him and stood. Welcome to GridPath, I said. We'll be in touch for the rollout. As I turned to leave, my mother's voice cracked. Jessica, wait. I paused by the door, looked back once, and smiled gently. You were right about one thing, I said. Without you, I wouldn't have made it here. Then I walked out, the echo of my heels mixing with the steady ding of the elevator, the sound of closure, of history rewritten in ink. 6 months later, the numbers spoke louder than pride ever could. Hale Agworks had not only recovered, it was thriving. Delivery times were down by 44%, overhead costs had dropped by nearly half, and their retail contracts, once circling the drain, were now reinstated. The board called it a miracle. I called it mathematics, teamwork, and accountability, things they'd once refused to see in me. GridPath had hit every KPI in the contract, which meant our clause triggered automatically. The company accountants confirmed it. GridPath was now entitled to acquire 35% equity in Hale Agworks. A third of the family empire earned not through inheritance, but through results. I didn't celebrate. I just stared at the email, then closed my laptop quietly. A week later, I met with my team in the same glass-walled office where it all began. "We did it," Lena said, grinning. "It's official, you own a piece of your past now." I nodded. "Not own," I corrected softly. "Redefine." Our next move wasn't expansion, it was redistribution. I restructured Hale's labor contracts, reinstated fair wages, and created the Driver and Warehouse Welfare Fund, channeling 10% of our joint profits into better healthcare and education programs for logistics workers. Manny oversaw the rollout. "You're turning dispatch into destiny," he joked, but his voice trembled a little when he said it. Even the local paper noticed. The new headline read, "From empty seat to full circle, GridPath founder rebuilds the family business from within." I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to. The work was enough. But there was one thing left unfinished. Late one evening, after everyone had gone home, I found myself standing again in the top-floor boardroom, the same place where my father had once dismissed me with a single sentence. The city lights spilled across the glass, painting reflections of highways and cranes, the arteries of everything I'd built. The room was silent now. The chair at the head of the table sat empty. I walked toward it, carrying 2 frames in my hands. The first held the graduation program from that forgotten day, still creased where my name had gone unread. The second held the $40 million contract, the ink now dry and faded slightly under glass. 2 pieces of paper, one where my name had been ignored, one where I wrote it myself. I placed them side by side on the shelf behind the chair. For the first time, they belonged in the same room. I stood there for a long while, breathing in the quiet. Then, almost as if summoned by that silence, I heard the door open behind me. "Jessica?" It was my mother. Her voice was softer than I remembered, smaller, almost hesitant. She stepped inside, hands clasped together. Time had drawn new lines across her face, but her eyes still carried the same careful caution, the kind people wear when they're not sure they're welcome. "I didn't think you'd still be here," she said. "Just finishing up," I replied. She looked around the room, the monitors, the charts, the hum of the servers beneath the floor. "The company. It feels different now," she said quietly. "People talk about you in the halls. They say you listen." I said nothing. Then she swallowed, her voice trembling. "You did it. You really did." It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't even close, but it was the first time she'd ever said something that resembled belief. I turned to her and smiled, not with triumph, but with calm. "Not despite you and Dad," I said. "Because I learned to stand without anyone holding the other end." She looked down, tears catching in the light. "We thought we were protecting you," she whispered. "But we were really just afraid you'd outgrow us." I didn't respond. Some silences are meant to hold space, not fill it. Finally, I said, "There's coffee downstairs if you'd like. The drivers take their breaks there now, it's open to everyone." She nodded, eyes wet, and quietly left the room. When the door closed, I turned back toward the window. Outside, trucks moved like veins of light along the interstate, carrying harvests, materials, futures. The same motion I'd once studied as a waitress, the same rhythm that built GridPath, now pulsed through a company that used to shut me out. The chair behind me, the empty seat, wasn't empty anymore. Not because I'd taken it, but because I'd changed what it meant to sit there. I glanced once more at the framed papers. The past and the present, side by side. One represented silence. The other, voice. Under my breath, I whispered, "If they don't call your name, build something that forces the world to read it." The city answered with its own rhythm, trucks humming, streetlights blinking, engines rising and falling like breath. It was the sound of systems alive, of second chances running on schedule. As I left the room, the elevator dinged the same note that had followed me through every chapter of my life. I smiled at the sound. This time, it didn't echo emptiness, it echoed arrival. And as the doors closed, I thought of all the others sitting in the crowd somewhere, waiting for their names to be called. Have you ever had your own empty seat moment when the people who should have been proud simply weren't? Tell me where you're watching from. Because wherever you are, you're not sitting alone anymore.